the entire. Okay, there we go. We got recording. So we did start.
Do a Hollywood do-over, please.
Yeah. So my name is Lloyd Halferty. I am in Toronto, Canada, and so we had, if I go way back in time to 2019, summer of 2019, we were organizing some events here in Toronto in support of Global Cooperation Day. So one of our colleagues in New Zealand, Adam Greenwell, his mother, Liz Greenwell, had this concept, this idea of creating a new UN event called Global Cooperation Day that would take place on October 4th, which is the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi. And so we took up that mantle and said, okay, let's promote this idea of having a Global Cooperation Day. And so we tried to organize an event. So what we wanted to do was plant a tree of peace and reconciliation on Global Cooperation Day in 2019. And we actually ended up not doing it on that day. We did it before October 4th. We actually did it on September 15th, 2019, where we planted a tree of peace and reconciliation on a piece of property out not in Markham where I live, but out in Pickering, Ontario. And that was a celebration we had at a farm. It was actually, it's a piece of farmland. It's a flight school. This gentleman does ultralight flight training. So he sends people way up into the air to go gliding around. No motors on these. And so this was actually, it was a symbolic tree in the sense that it was planted on federal lands. In other words, lands that are controlled by the Canadian government, and that were for many, many decades, actually, for my entire life, these lands were being designated as a place where the federal government wanted to build a second airport for Toronto. But all the farmers in the area were very much opposed to that because they were leasing the land from the federal government. So we decided to plant this tree of peace and reconciliation on federal land, on this property that was used as a flight school, again, leased from the Canadian government. And so we thought, okay, we're going to create a sacred space here on this land. And then because of our relationship through We Energize Global Cooperation Turtle Island, which is the nonprofit organization we created around that time as well, which we said would focus on this idea of life, value, peace, education. We planted this tree. It got word around that we were planting this tree. We ended up contacted by this gentleman in Bermuda by the name of Corin Smith. And he said that we'd love to be able to plant another tree of peace and reconciliation here in Bermuda, and we want it to be planted symbolically as well, as representing peace, reconciliation, and forgiveness. And so we decided that that tree should be twinned as well with a tree here in Toronto. We plant a second tree. So from the 2019 tree, then of course the pandemic came along. That first tree was actually symbolic of a project we wanted to do out in Eastern Ontario, in a place called Prince Edward County. So there's this county that we were planning this project that was all pre-pandemic. We actually wanted to demonstrate a fairly large-scale aquaponic system that was built. We wanted to build it inside one of these pod buildings, these solar roof buildings that were this Canadian technology. So we were going to demonstrate this large-scale aquaponic system. I do biochar, so what we wanted to do was demonstrate a system that was developed in Alberta, where they're using biochar as the growth substrate for the aquaponic system. So we were going to take the system from Alberta, but then put it in this solar roof building and create a large-scale aquaponics food production system and demonstrate that out there. So we planted the tree as symbolic of Global Cooperation Day, but also because this was kind of the launch of our project. That never happened, of course, because the pandemic came along. Everything got scuttled. Our partner at the time was the federal government through the it's because the federal government of Canada had signed the Paris Agreement. They were bound, all of the federal departments of Canada were bound to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. So those reduction of CO2 emissions. Our partner was the Canadian military, because the Canadian military had no idea how to reduce emissions, because that's not in their mandate at all. So we were going to plant trees across the county and then turn those trees into biochar and use the biochar in the aquaponic system to grow fish and food and veggies and all this stuff. So this is the whole concept of this whole regenerative food production system that we wanted to demonstrate.
Okay.
It never happened, of course, because the pandemic, but we ended up planting this second tree of peace and reconciliation in the middle of the pandemic in the summer of 2020, down in St. Jamestown, Toronto. That tree was twinned with the tree in Bermuda. And that started this whole thing rolling. And then we got word from people in Africa that contacted me and said, oh, well, this is really interesting. There was a gentleman by the name of Patrick Kaka in Democratic Republic of Congo. And we ended up doing this second event at the Tree of Peace and Reconciliation in Toronto, called the Sunlight Spectacle event, where we were going to try to raise awareness about the Middle Passage, in sort of this idea of the crossroads of the Atlantic in Bermuda. So we wanted to really engage with the Toronto, sort of like Hollywood North, and try to get their attention. We never really did, because I have no connections in that realm of entertainment or whatever. But we did the ceremonies, we did the recordings, and but we also did plant a tree in Democratic Republic of Congo, and I believe there's another tree in the Philippines, that are all twinned together. And so we thought, let's do this whole program, and it was Carlos Richard Sancos in Sierra Leone that was saying, this is great. We want these kinds of food production systems here too. We want to do this to help achieve the SDGs, to help achieve the global goals and the food security. We need these solutions too. And so we've been promoting all of these different types of what we call open source regenerative climate smart infrastructure solutions through the programs of planting the trees, which in turn helps to create community partnerships at the local level, which is what ultimately we want to create in every local community through these ceremonies. So we do the ceremony of the tree planting, we bring all the partners of the community out, we get them to pledge to support what we call the female and feminist humanitarian entrepreneurs. So the entrepreneurs basically that are building and operating, running, producing this climate, what we call climate smart food in the local communities. And so it's a complicated ecosystem we've built, but it's been mostly myself and this gentleman, Carlos. He's not on the call with us today, but basically he's in Sierra Leone. And it was another gentleman in Kenya as well that started this whole thing rolling. He was the one that came out and said, let's do this, along with Carlos and myself. And Andrew was kind of there fairly early as well in those conversations. Of course, as well with Corin Smith, because actually I think it was Andrew that even originally introduced me to Corin. So he's been involved, obviously, in this whole process over the last almost 3 years now. It has been about 3 years since we planted the first tree of peace and reconciliation in 2019. So September 15th, 2019 to now is 3 years later. But what I'm doing now is building this network, trying to create partnerships. And we're trying to create a business to operate or basically manage this network. So we created a business. Now we have a business group, UnityNet International. That's myself and a gentleman also here in the Greater Toronto area by the name of Mark. He has a business of its own, Carbon Shot Earth it's called. So basically the idea of this business was, how do we demonstrate partnerships for the goals, how to demonstrate SDG 17. That was the original idea. And how to actually make money doing that. How to be a business demonstrating SDG 17 at the local level. What is the business model for that? To be a business that all we do is demonstrate SDG 17. That's our mission, that's our purpose. So it's been difficult, right?
Thank you for your short answer. Lisa, you have your hand raised, and I think Mr. Lino is here for the regular meeting, but Lisa, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Yes, I was asked to come in late February, early March and share my connections that I had gathered over the last 5 years as a result of trying to unify hip hop culture to run its own sport in the Olympics and keep from being colonized. And through this process, I pulled up the basic structure of the nonprofit business model that we see worldwide, the very skeletal structure that they put together to get these things started in new communities. And the very concept itself is pretty much taken off at the ground level of working with community-based organizations and non-governmental organizations that are already on the ground serving and assisting their communities in a variety of methods. So what we've been doing is, or what I've been doing is conducting interviews on the ground, using the Pied Piper method that all nonprofits use to inform different groups and get them to form their immediate partnerships with other CBO and NGO around them. At this point in time, we have 14 associations that are already in their infancy of being formed, and there are more coming along the way. And essentially through this process, every single level learns quite naturally about how to govern themselves. Because of the work that they do on the ground, they know what's needed. And this type of business structure is set up so that every single partner gets one vote. It doesn't matter how many people they represent. They each represent a specific segment of society. And with the goal being leave no one behind. That is what this basic structure is all about. At the association structure, they're able to better negotiate lower prices for goods and services that they need. Once they get to that point where they're making a regional partnership, they're gathering the data with which to interact with government authority, different departments of government, to let them know this is what your job really is. And then, of course, national vendor partnership, they actually become a partner in governance with all the data that they formed, all the people that they represent, all the facts that they've been able to maintain. Now, beyond that, what I'd like to do is introduce Chad Harper, also known as Superman. He works, he is a big wheel in the hip hop community and also a member of the Diaspora. One of like 4 that we have now that we've connected with that I would very much love to come and present to you about their work. But I think Chad is going to do the best job of introducing himself and the very important work he does, because I do know that our membership here will be very interested in helping him to expand his reach so that we can get into the interior on a larger scale.
Well, thank you so much, Chad. Before you begin,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Lino is here, who conducts normally our weekly meetings, but I think it's important that you take as much time as you like to introduce yourself so we'll have an idea of what is at the table. I myself am actually on the National Advisory Board for the Universal Hip Hop Museum out of Bronx, New York, founded by Rocky Bacano. And I was a brand ambassador for Generation Hip Hop Global that has now, I guess, in hiatus pretty much since the death of the executive director. but I'm totally committed to assisting you in whatever way I can. Mr. Nino, please be patient with us. We're going to let Mr. Chad Harper introduce himself, and then we'll see about taking on the regular weekly meeting. Mr. Harper, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for the invite. Thank you, Lisa. It's an honor to speak with you guys. And I'll be as brief as possible. My organization is called Hip Hop Saves Lives. And I started that organization for multiple reasons. One, because hip hop, saved my life as a young teen, feeling lost, from broken home and issues in society and all these different things that teenagers face. It created a sense of community for me, number one. But secondly, most importantly, the culture of hip hop is a collaborative but competitive culture. And why I say that is very important because in the culture of hip hop, you are always challenging each other. And so you're always sharpening your tool to be the best at your craft. Whether you're a breakdancer, a DJ, an MC, you're always challenging the other members and your local community to be at your best. And for me, that really built my self-esteem. Moving fast forward, living in New York City in the early 2000s, I kind of noticed hip hop was taking a very big turn to where you no longer had your Public Enemies, you no longer had your KRS-Ones, your Poor Righteous Teachers, and all these guys that I learned about African culture and African history and Black American history more from hip hop than from any school I've ever attended. Even university, I attended Morehouse College, a very respectable Black American university, often called the Black Harvard. Never did I learn more about African culture and Black American history through hip hop and these great artists that came out of the 80s and early 90s. So as I saw hip hop taking this turn to more money, more violence, more materialism, I thought, how can we get, I gained so much personally from the wisdom that hip hop gave us in its lyrics. How can I get young people to embrace this again? Because there were some artists that were still around. And what I did was I came up with a curriculum where I educate kids about social issues, but through the works of humanitarians, right? So we're not just talking about the problems of the world, we're focusing on the change makers of the world. And then we learn from why they do what they do, in what country and what culture do they live in, and how culture differs around the world. And then the young kids are able to write hip hop lyrics expressing what they've learned and sharing their opinion about the issue and honoring the humanitarians and change makers that are working to solve these problems. So I took this curriculum to a Bronx principal named Jamal Bowman, who is now a congressman, and he's coined the hip hop congressman. He wears the Wu-Tang pin on his collar, and he's a congressman for the Bronx. So shout out to Jamal Bowman. He was the first principal that bought my curriculum in New York City. Within a year or two, we had spread all across New York City, Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, everywhere but Staten Island. We had been hired by libraries, by community centers. Carnegie Hall has a very interesting program where they take musicians into detention centers. My organization was the #1 organization that they partnered for years, bringing artists into detention centers, working with incarcerated children to write songs, to express their emotions. Seeing this really broke my heart, and it was a very heavy workload for me to carry. From there, I took a sabbatical and moved to East Africa. I lived in Ethiopia, I lived in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, visited Rwanda, Zanzibar, all over East Africa, sharing the curriculum over there. It was incredibly embraced. And In 2019, I took a break from my work and took a job as a video journalist and traveled all over the world for an organization called ORU that it was like a Facebook for humanitarians. And I think I traveled to about 21 different countries in 2019. And everywhere I went around the world, there was so much love and admiration for Black American culture. The Black, people would meet me and they'd be so fascinated. They'd talk about Michael Jordan, Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King, as well as like Tupac or Beyonce, and this huge, huge admiration. I was like, wow, Black American culture is one of the most absolutely loved and adored cultures around the world. And it really gave me great pride in being Black American. And with Marcus Garvey being my favorite, I guess, person from the last 100 years, he has a famous quote that always sat very deep with me. And it says, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. And as I was doing my Hip Hop Saves Lives work and giving all these young people an opportunity to learn about cultures around the world and write about humanitarians, I thought maybe I need to backtrack a little bit. Maybe I need to step back, because I didn't know very much about Black American culture. I don't know very much about African culture. I learned mostly from traveling and going to Africa. So I decided to start a new curriculum called I Am Black American, which is going to turn our Black History Month into a global Afro History Month. So we celebrate Afro history all across the globe as a collective. And we do that through a curriculum that we share with young people. Again, this is student and artist created content. And for example, I'm collecting music from all 50 states. And each state is to do research on the Black Americans that they admire and honor from their state. So each state will tell the history and put it to music, great Black Americans from their state. So Mississippi will handle Mississippi, Ohio will handle Ohio, Florida, and so on and so on. And as I was sharing this curriculum with my co-producer with my music, who's from Kenya, he said, man, you guys are lucky. You have way more Black history in the United States. I know you guys complain, but in Kenya, when we go to school, history starts at colonization. We know nothing about Kenya before colonization. So I shared this story with my homie from South Africa. He was like, oh, it's the same. Growing up in South Africa, history starts at colonization. So I said, okay, I branded this as I Am Black American, but I want to extend this to the whole African diaspora and of course to the motherland. So I'm sharing this curriculum with Africa, the United States, and all of the Americas and everyone that's part of the African diaspora to make music that honors the people from your region. And I'm creating this master website where we can all put our music that tells the story of our history. And the songs will be logged based on century, so we can go back and say, okay, in the 1900s, you had these heroes, in the 18, and the 17, 16. So we can, it'll be like a music encyclopedia of Afro history from around the world. And again, I'm reaching out to artists and young people and teachers and educators across the world. All music has to be submitted by the end of December, so that in January I can categorize all the music, and then we start launching. So again, February, which is Black History Month in the United States, is now a global celebration of Afro history. And during that month of February, we will have live events, online streaming events from each region, where the young people can present the music that they've written and recorded. They can talk about the process, they can perform it live, they can discuss, the different heroes from the region. So it'll be a huge online, like multiple online events every day throughout the month of February, where all the material can be presented and shared around the world. And I'm just working for this to grow and grow. And sometime in November, yes, Omar, just give me 60 more seconds. Sometime in November, I am actually going to Gambia to researched the history of Kunta Kinte, who comes from the story of Roots, and I view him as the most famous enslaved African on American soil. His story through Roots has touched, everyone across our country and many people around the world. After he passed, through DNA, they traced his family back to Gambia and the village that he came from. So I'm going to travel there and do a song and music video that honors the most famous enslaved African on American soil as a special launch to the I Am Black American curriculum. So that's my story. I appreciate the time, and any questions, please.
Well, Umar, before we get to your question, let me tell you, sir, that first, thank you. But secondarily, in the Gambia, there is a gentleman named Sharif Balgay. He's part of our regular team. He's actually, as I said, not just from Gambia, but he's also a diplomatic representative for ECOWAS, the Economic Community of Southwestern States. But it was 3 years ago that he reached out to me through a mutual associate to develop a flotilla to Gambia, specifically to Kunta Kinte Island, because unfortunately, due to climate change, it has been now reduced to 1/6 of its size and is rapidly declining. So the idea is that if we were to pay attention to this, we may be able to link your efforts to revitalizing your actual island itself as a demonstration of how hip hop saves lives can actually save the planet. But next month, October, as you may know, is Black History Month in the UK, specifically in London and in Germany. And in November, Brazil. So since you have a December cutoff date, I suggest that I commit myself to assisting you in raising a global awareness campaign to attract all of the content that you need in such a way that what we can do is treat this as a docu-reality series. So if you're comfortable with that, you do have my contact information in the chat. So I'll ask you to contact me after this. Umar, the floor is yours. And then Mr. Salino will get back to you. Umar, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's a nice project that you are trying to initiate. Looking at it, it will be very, very nice because I see it in a different way. Though we have our own culture, but music industry now in Africa has its own departments. It has its own department. It has its own way of understood by the youth. So the current youth in Africa, let me give an example of Nigeria. And Ghanaians are now trying to copy Nigerian music because of the language. And hip hop in America has taken over even in Africa. But now it's changing. Now Africans discover their own way of hip hop. Initially, it's a rap. The rap in Africa music is being copied in America by the Black Americans. But now we African musicians now discover their own way of music, which is similar to hip hop. So when you look at the trend, it's hip hop but have its own African origin. So you can see mostly the young African musicians now discover their own way of music of Africa. If the curriculum would be very, very clear to Africans. Now, the African musicians, they don't want to emulate or copy the hip hop in America. They discover their own way and they have their own markets. And when you study the market of African musicians now is booming. Just recently, you can listen to one of the music that is being trending. Come and see you, Ulululu, that Nigerian music. It cut across all Africa. Besides that, too, you can see all music that come from even South Africa. The moment it's trending, it cut across the whole Africa. So the hip hop that you are bringing to Africa should have similarity, should have an origin of Africa. Because now Africans are now discovering themselves in music. They stop copying this, a lot of Tupac, a lot of, Michael Jackson's. They stop all. Now they discover their P Square. they discover a lot of, I mean, local musicians, let me say, John Bazin of Nigeria. So you can see that now the young musicians that are coming in Africa are mentored by African musicians, not the Black hip hop Americans now. So when initiating it, make sure that the Department of African Music, which is dynamic, the music in Africa now is dynamic.
Yes.
So once you are coming in, then you should make sure your curriculum will follow the dynamism of the music. Now,
yes, and I just want to add that my organization is called Hip Hop Saves Lives, but this is not a strict, this is not just a hip hop curriculum. We want, you know, hip hop and then singing, and then even if some people just want to do poetry, to music. It is all forms of music. It's not just hip hop. That's the difference of my original curriculum to what I'm doing now with I Am Black American. Again, yes, my organization is called Hip Hop Saves Lives, but this I Am Black American curriculum is for all genres of music. It's just music, period. Because I know, and I listen to a lot of African music, and you know, I've been to 10 different African countries. I've gone to music festivals in Tanzania and Uganda. So I am 110% open to the African influence on their own culture, their own music. But thank you for saying that, sir.
Also, Chad, in regards to I Am Black American, I listened to 16 hours of broadcasts from the United Nations in the past 48 hours. All of the countries address the Sustainable Development Goals except the United States. It is, in fact, a Howard University study in 2020 indicated no state in the United States is even halfway to addressing any of the Sustainable Development Goals, but those people left furthest behind are those of Indigenous and African American descent.
For sure.
I would suggest and ask you if we could consider holding the United States accountable to what President Biden claims is the sin of America, which is its racism, and bring it in such a way through I Am Black America to actually demonstrate the actual activities that we are already doing that impact one or more of these Sustainable Development Goals, because it's not that we're not doing it, it's that it's not being recorded. So if we do it in such a way that we create a curriculum for each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals through your effort, then you do have the opportunity to attract $130 trillion worth of money that the United Nations Global Compact CFO task force is devoted to focusing on the Sustainable Development Goals. But if you don't, you won't.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I take that, and I accept that. So I would love to partner with you on this. I follow your lead, and thank you for that wisdom, sir. Thank you.
Well, my number's in the chat. I'm at your convenience. Mr. Lino, technically, this is your meeting. So, are you able to unmute yourself, sir? Mr. Lino, are you with us? If he's still here, let's see here. I do see that he's here, but I don't hear him. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to stop recording and start again. Just one thing.
Okay.